Hello and welcome back to the Ain't Dead Yet podcast. On today's episode, we have a very special guest. This one's been a long time coming. We connected, how long now?
Spring?
Yeah,
April?
so 6 months or so, a little over 6 months. Pretty quick connection. I gotta give my boy a shout out, and we'll get to that in the episode on how all that went down. But I'm pumped to have him here today. I think his story is going to impact many. He has his own podcast. He has his own brand. We're going to get into all of those things and where they come from and what they mean to him as we progress today. But just pumped to have you here, man. And his name is John Fisher.
Thank you, brother. I'm happy to be here. I feel like I'm going to be on the verge of tears this whole conversation because, like you were saying, we go back. It really hasn't been that long, about 6 months, but the first time I heard of you was when you were talking to Matt on this platform. And I leaned into a little bit of courage. I was like, I gotta at least reach out to you and see if you're willing to talk. And I'm glad I did, man. We've had so many good conversations, and I'm just grateful for all the conversations we've had. And then, just last month, you taking me up on the offer to get some miles in on a whim.
Yeah.
I happened to be in the area, and I asked if you'd be okay or if you'd be willing to get some miles in. And we met up on Lady Bird and put some miles down. It was a good time. But yeah, I feel very blessed to be here today. You asked me earlier this week if I'd be able to come down and be on the podcast. And I grabbed my phone, walked outside, dropped a few tears, and I was like, yeah, absolutely. So thanks, bro.
Yeah, I know for sure. It's my honor, man, to have you here. It's the best. I'm so pumped. What's odd is it didn't really ever click because but we've never had shallow conversations. It's always been deep. Mm-hmm. It's never been like, man, the sun's out today and the wind's blowing. It's always like straight into the deep end.
Yeah.
And really that's what this platform is about. Mm-hmm. And very similar to yours. Mm-hmm. And we'll get into that. But I'm just so grateful you're here, and I'm pumped for this conversation. Just to kick it off and kind of get the audience comfortable, give us a little bit of the background. Where are you from? Kind of like childhood, early childhood, that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I was thinking about this because I'm a talker. I'm a yapper. So I was like, if I'm going to give a quick intro, what are the bullet points just to give the listeners a better understanding of me? I grew up in Spokane, Washington, and joined the military when I was 21. I lived in Northern California for a few years. I was packing parachutes, doing survival things for a little bit. And then eventually I volunteered to go through this survival program. And I went through that program, very quickly realized how uncomfortable the training was. But that's why I volunteered to go through it, because I wanted the opportunity to be thrown into uncertain environments where I would need to adapt to see if I had the ability to overcome adversity. Went through that training. Another reason I did that is because I joined the military to go out for pararescue, and I quit 4 weeks into it. So I had this guilt, I had this shame, and a lot of regret for not following through with what I started. So the idea of going through this survival program kickstarted this flame, this new fire in me. I decided to wait a few years. I retrained into that career field, and it's called survival, evasion, resistance, and escape. And I get to teach those skills to those who are at risk of isolation or capture. So we give them a skill set, give them opportunity to develop confidence, and we throw them into the fire, and we see how they do. We guide them, and we want them to be successful. We want them to be successful so they can survive and return with their honor. So I've been in that program since 2017. And then in August of 22, The marriage that I was in at the time was at an all-time low. And I felt like I had two options in my life. It was suicide, or there was a door I didn't know. Like, the only thing that I'll say it this way. The only time I felt peace or some form of joy or happiness was when I thought about ending my life. And I talk about this a lot, about the invitation I didn't know I needed. A friend reached out to me around this same time and asked if I'd be down to run a 50-mile ultra marathon in North Texas called Palo Duro. It was like 2 months before that run was going to start, and I've been running like 3 miles a week at that time. Not very prepared, but instantly accepted that invitation because it was an avenue towards hope. Mm-hmm. And I jumped on that and been running ultras for 2 years. And that's just a thing that I do. And I know we'll get into it for sure. But I really like to share that because it was a pivotal moment in my life, in the story of my life. And I'm grateful for my suffering. Mm-hmm. And I'm grateful for that invitation that I didn't know I needed. And it's been a beautiful journey ever since then to get me to where I'm at now. And ultimately those moments of volunteer suffering really just gave me opportunities to be humbled. And in my most humbled state is when I'm fueled by something internally. And that internal fuel is compassion, it's love for humanity. Like, I'm on fire, bro. I love people fiercely and fully, and I'm not going to stop. So that is what kickstarted the idea to start a podcast, which is, that was an idea. And I had no clue how I was going to execute on that. But I was like, man, I got the idea, and I feel like God's calling me to do it. We're going to roll with it. And it was awesome to have you as the first guest on that podcast. And now I just think of the ways that I get to serve. And I'm grateful to God for Him allowing me to do the things that I can do. Because no longer do I look at ultras as a box that's going to validate me as a human. Now I look at it as a way to serve others and a way to glorify God's kingdom, not mine. And right now I'm linked up with a nonprofit organization called Warrior WOD, and their mission is to serve veterans that have post-traumatic stress, suicidal ideations, morbid ideations. And what that program does is it gives vets a 6-month gym membership, gives them a nutrition coach, and it links them up with a mentor. So I get to serve as a mentor. And we're also going to raise funds for the organization this April as we take on the Arizona Monster 300.
Nice.
Yeah, so there's a little bit more than bullet points, but I really wanted to give that background information as kind of the foundation.
I hear you. Yeah, and I want to dig into some things that I still have questions about along those lines. Mm-hmm. So early childhood, though. Oh, yeah. Parents. Mm-hmm. 2 parents? Single parent? What was that situation?
Yeah, I had mom and dad. They divorced when I was 6.
Okay.
When they got a divorce is when me, 3 brothers, and me and my 3 brothers moved up to Spokane. And Dad, he stayed in San Diego. He was in the Marine station at Camp Pendleton, and we would see him every year or so. Always terrified to see him because I knew how quick he was to anger. Mm. And me being one of 4 boys, I was the only one that ever felt his wrath, his rage. I was the only one that he ever struck. I was the only one that he ever beat and abused. And I remember at a young age, because if I think about my childhood, I've got a lot of sad memories, and I'll share them because it goes back to my childhood trauma from my dad. And I've got one really beautiful memory. If you can remember, try to remind me because I may lose it. But I got one beautiful memory as a child. And I could do more thinking. I'm sure I've got lots of beautiful memories, but initial thoughts, it's filled with trauma. But then I've got one beautiful memory. When I was I don't know how old I was, like 9 or something. I remember visiting with my dad in California. This is the first time I drank beer. I think I was like 9 or something. I think we were watching like The Thin Red Line. I just remember it being really heavy, very gory, very violent. And then I remember we were blowing up our little arm floaties because we were going to go for a little swim. And I was so excited. I was like, yeah, we got to go to the pool. And then fast forward, my next memory is my dad had one hand on one shoulder and he's pushing me underneath the water. And I was like, oh, my dad's just playing. And I was like, well, he's not letting me up, so I feel like he's not playing. And then his other hand goes on my other shoulder and he holds me underwater for an extended amount of time. And the reason I remember the floaties is because the floaties were trying to keep my head above water, and my dad needed 2 hands to hold my head underwater. And I never knew why he did it. And that's kind of the intro to some other experiences that I've had with him. He came to visit another time. We were at the lake. I walked inside the cabin, and next thing I knew, he was just throwing me around the room like I was just a rag doll. No clue why. Threw me in my room, and I remember picking up my dusty Bible. I was like, I'm going to pick this thing up, and I want to make my dad proud next time he comes in here. I want him to see I'm a good little boy. So I wiped the dust off. I'm reading the Bible. I'm just trying to memorize the Bible in 2 minutes before he comes in. And he comes in, pulls me out in the living room. He said, hey, I've had a conversation with your brothers, and we all agree that you've got an attitude problem. You need to fix it. I'm just a young kid. I don't know. I'm like, okay, I don't really know what I did. Side note for everybody listening, like for me to talk about these things, like my body right now is shaking and I feel really, it's just a response that I have, but it's my past, it's my reality. So I hope that my trembling voice isn't too much of a distraction, but
it's really clear.
Okay, awesome.
Doing great.
Thank you. And then the last significant moment I remember with my dad as a kid was he came to visit, and we were in this hotel. And through the years, like he'd give me some advice, and actually, I'll get to that in a moment. We were in this hotel, and he'd always want to express his strength. He'd always want to assert his dominance, and so he looked at me, and I felt like I was the only one that he would call on to fight him. And he's like, John, I want you to fight me. I'm like, no, thanks, Dad, I don't want to. And he was persistent. He said, fight me. I said, no, thank you. And next thing I know, we're on the ground, we're fighting. And I remember somewhere along the lines, he had my head down on the ground, and he just was beating the back of my skull. And to get him off me, I threw elbows until I made him bleed. And then he picked me up, threw me in between the wall and the bed, and just called me like a piece of shit or something like that. And I remember all this trauma, all these things that happened to me from my dad, and I also recognized that my brothers witnessed it all, but they never did anything about it. Mm-hmm. So over the last 2 years, as I started to get to work on my childhood and my trauma, I felt like there was resentment that was developed towards my brothers. And that just really broke me. It still does, because the people that I loved the most didn't help me, but I helped me. And I look at my childhood trauma and recognize that in my formative years as a young boy, my father threw me into survival situations, and I did what I needed to do to survive. And now I get to teach others how to survive in the military. And it's my absolute passion. I love it with my whole heart, to give others a chance at being successful if they're going to survive. Give them the skills and the confidence so they can come back home with their honor. It's an absolute blessing that I get to be a part of the organization that I work with. But I also remember my formative years, the advice that my dad gave me, which was join the military and fuck as many women as you can. He told me that as a child. And I hated it. I hated that he said that to me, because in my core, I love people. I'm like, why would you say that to me? I need more than that. I need you to show me how to be a man. A good one. And I didn't feel like he was doing that. So with that, the advice that he gave me after I got a divorce, I saw myself going down that path. Well, I already joined the military at that time, but I had regrets of missed opportunities. And I started leaning into the second piece of advice that my dad gave me. I was like, let me get out there and learn a little bit about me. Essentially, I just threw myself into the fire. And I learned how quickly I could be the person that I didn't want to be. And eventually, enough was enough. I said, you're capable. You are capable of being the man you never wanted to be. If you want change, make the change. Be the change you want to be. Practice integrity every day of your life. Be patient in the process, and be steadfast in your integrity, and be who you know you can be. So I got off that beaten path, and I got on the straight and narrow, and the most courageous thing I've ever done in my life was I told God that I trust him with my whole heart, and I lean not on my own understandings. When I made that decision, that was the most terrifying thing I've ever done. Because I'm like, God, you gave me this brain, you gave me this heart. And if I give you all of it, then what do I have to lean on? But that fire that I threw myself in has been the absolute greatest blessing, because I believe that a blade isn't going to serve its intended purpose until it's ruthlessly beaten and forged so that it can serve its intended purpose. So this fire that I threw myself into after making a conscious decision to choose life every day and run ultras to gain wisdom provided opportunities to be forged. And 2 years later, I overwhelmed with gratitude. I love life. I love people. And I stayed on this narrow path, trusting God with my whole heart and leaning not on my understandings. And along this path, I met the most amazing woman I've ever met in my entire life. It really hasn't been that long, bro. I actually met her through the podcast, and we connected on the old Instagram. But her and I have had the best conversations, and feel like this fire that I threw myself into, I was in the process of being forged, but I also was crippled emotionally by shame and guilt and regret, resentment, and I knew I had a lot of work that needed to be done on me. I felt like I was in this trench, and if I stopped for a moment to reflect on what got me there, it was the shovel that was in my hand. Like I put myself in the trench, and I was trying so hard to figure out what I needed to do to get myself out of the trench. And then I met this amazing woman who she didn't do anything. She just was her. She just showed up and accepted me as I am in full. And I felt like all this shame and regret and guilt and all this stuff that I was caked in that was holding me back from being the person that I knew I could be. She just accepted me fully, and I started to feel lighter. This chain that I had that was anchoring me, just her being in my life, like that chain's gone, and for the first time in my life, like I feel like I know exactly who I am, and I know exactly who I want to be, and I tell her every day how grateful I am for her and how much she means to me just for being her. And yeah, I'm leaving in 2 weeks, and I haven't even met her in person, man. She's stop number one. But we've been having setting records on audio recording on text, bro. I attempted to send her a 30-minute voice recording. Believe it or not, I am capable of sending a 30-minute voice recording. It said no, too big a file, can't happen. But yeah, all that to say, I think about this narrow path that I wanted to stay on, and I fought so hard just to gain wisdom, to learn more about myself, and I certainly did. But this is just one of those beautiful, stay on the path, and I met the most beautiful, amazing woman, and I'm so grateful for her.
Man. Okay, we got a lot to talk about there.
We do.
So the dad stuff, I can certainly resonate with on some level. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of people listening can on some level. Once you mentioned starting to work on yourself and your childhood trauma in 2022, you said?
Yeah.
That's right around the time that you were at your lowest with your marriage and other things that were going on.
Yeah.
Suicidal ideation. I don't want to speak for you, but I want to make sure I'm regurgitating it correctly.
You're right.
Mm-hmm. When you first stepped foot in the therapist's office, or I would assume it was back in person at this time, post-COVID.
Yeah.
Mine started in COVID.
Okay.
So yours was most likely in person.
Mm-hmm.
Can you share with the audience, because I get this question a lot and I want it to come from somebody other than me. Mm-hmm. People will ask this question. They'll say, I'm terrified. How do I do it? What do I do? What do I say? How do I show up? It's this, and it's all really the same thing. And so I want to ask you, that first experience, what was it like for you? And was it hard for you to take that first step?
Yeah, so it wasn't just a singular moment or a singular event, I guess, or experience. I went to multiple organizations on the base to receive care. And this was when the marriage we were still married. I wanted to fight for the marriage. I wanted it to survive. So went to Military Family Readiness Center and tried to get, it may have been a different organization, but went on the base, tried to talk to a counselor, and I was trying to have a healthy conversation. And the individual said, I'm not going to give advice, but based off of what you're telling me, like I probably would lean towards divorce. I was like, bro, that's not what I'm asking for, man. Like, that's not why I came to you. Went somewhere else. Went online, used TRICARE to link up with a therapist. And she was very solutions-based. There wasn't really... I needed someone to listen to me. I need someone to listen. And she was giving solutions based off of the circumstances. I'm like, man, my mental health is rattled right now. I'm coming to you today with the hopes and dreams of fighting for this marriage. Next week when I show up, I may not have that desire. So she was coming at me with different solutions based off of the present circumstance in a mentally unstable state. So that was really challenging for me. So I didn't feel like that was helpful. Fast forward. I stayed with TRICARE, got linked up with someone finally. Finally linked up with someone who listened. And the first thing she asked me was, let's talk about your childhood. Within the first 50 minutes, she told me most children who are victim of abuse from a parent, usually it's only one child. No one told me that before. I didn't know. So that was the invitation to recovery and breakthrough. But that didn't last long. TRICARE caught up. They said, hey, we need a referral. And if I'm going too far in the weeds.
No, you're right on.
Okay. That didn't last long. I was talking to her for about a month, making incredible progress. She was amazing. But I needed a referral. So I went, scheduled the referral appointment. That appointment was a 2-month wait. I had the appointment. They said they were going to try to continue the referral for me. The next day I get a phone call. They say, hey, we have people here. We have staff available. We can help. Your first appointment is in 1 month. I was like, okay. I'm mentally rattled right now. 1 month? I was like, okay. So I show up, and by this time, I'm on the base. It's mental health, their department. I'm filling out their questionnaire. They're asking me questions. Hey, do you have thoughts of killing yourself? I was like, yeah, I do. They're like, what are your plans? I was like, I don't have any. I don't want to live. Is that good enough? We need to get to work. I ended up seeing 2 different people that first day, and they didn't know what to do with me. So they sent me to like a group meeting once a week, just talk about things. I was like, I need to have a conversation with someone. More importantly, I need someone to listen to me because I need to get some things off me, and then I need guidance. But my individual meetings with those individuals were 1 month spread out. And I told them the first day I showed up, I said, this can't be my primary solution for survival. I was like, I'm going to let you know right now, this is the work I'm putting in to survive every day. I'm not waiting on you all for 1 month appointments. I can't do this. And I recognize that if I'm someone that's in this mental health debauchery, well, my own mental health was a wreck, but I'm thinking about the other people in the mental health department and like receiving this care. If they're receiving care once a month, I was like, okay, I got to do something about this. So we can get into that in a moment. But that started a really long process. A lot of individuals saw me 1 month out. They didn't know what to do with me. A few months ago, I had my annual checkup, and my flight doc comes out to me. He's like, hey, I saw that you were in ADAPT. How did that go? I was like, A what? I was like, I didn't do that. Was I supposed to? He said, in the records, it says that you were supposed to. Instantly, we're both confused. He said, hey man, let's just be bros. Come on to my office. Let's look at some things. He pulls up my records. There's people suggesting severe depression, bipolar, recommendations for ADAPT. None of it was passed to me. None of it. Finally, I go in and I'm like, listen, like, what is the problem with a referral? Can I get one? Fortunately, for my situation, they were allowing like mass referrals at the time, and I made the deadline by 1 day. So I got the referral, and now I'm in a year-long referral, and I got to go pick a therapist. I've been working with her for over a month, and it's been really awesome. It's been amazing. But to answer your question, like, what was that process like? I needed to be patient. There were times I wanted to flip tables, brother. I wanted to tear the roof off places. I wanted to rage, but I wanted to rage at the machine. I was so frustrated. Not just for me, I was frustrated for other people who are suffering that didn't have an outlet. That really, really triggered me, and I wasn't okay with that. I couldn't sit with it. So it required courage, man. Courage to stand your line and do what you know you need to do. So my encouragement is be courageous and take the step that you need to, so you can get the care and the help that you need. And asking for help is tough to ask for help, but I've been learning to do it, and it's beautiful when people show up and they want to help you. It's a basic need. Like, we want to help, we want to serve, we want to show up. I also recognize that I wanted to serve people who are in this journey for their own mental health. So I'll just give a little bullet. A year ago, I had an idea. I was running trails on the Air Force Base that I'm stationed at, and thought about all the lessons I've learned on the trails. And I was like, man, I wonder if I can create an ultra marathon on the base. 2 weeks ago, we executed that.
Nice.
Yeah. 50 people showed up, and I got a email from someone that day. He said, I went out for pararescue. I quit. I felt bad about it. I needed an opportunity to define resilience. And he just wanted to say thank you. And he ran his first ultra that day. And all worth it. Made it all worth it. So I sent that out to everybody. I said, hey, I just want you to know, like, thank you for everything. It was a year in the making, and he wasn't the only one, but I just give that shout out because I recognize my suffering, and I recognize other people's suffering, and I wanted to do something about it. But to answer your question, I needed to ask for help, and to do that, I leaned into being courageous. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that, and I love that you gave the whole window, the whole story, because it's important for people to understand. What I take away from that is, one, manage your own expectations. You know, if you're struggling and you go into therapy the first time, don't expect to walk out of there feeling like roses, right? And that has happened. I've heard experiences where that's the case. Wasn't mine. Doesn't sound like yours. And most people, because we hear like, oh, if we just take this step, we'll be fixed. And the other piece of that that's important, that's tied into this managing expectations piece, is starting to understand delayed gratification. And therapy has taught me that just as much as running has. It's like every time you go and you have a conversation, there's just a little bit more. You find just a little bit more. You know, and I heard someone describe it this way on a podcast. If you think of your soul as this vessel, each time you go in there and do some work, whether that's through running or therapy or whatever that outlet is, you're just carving just a little bit out each time, and it's creating more space. And I love that analogy. I love that analogy because that's what running's given me, and that's also what therapy's given me. It's given me more capacity, because I didn't realize for a long time that I was walking around ready to flip, like at any point, you know, whether that be like an outburst verbally, or like, I never, in the same way that you are, I love people. I've never wanted to harm a human. it doesn't interest me. There's nothing about that sounds cool or fun. My way of that outlet, or like getting that out, would be like doing something that hurt myself, right? Whether that's drinking too much or abusing drugs or pursuing the wrong people in my life, or it transitioned to running too much, right? Exercising too much. And it was my way of coping throughout my entire process. But I'm glad you shared that. I think it's important that people understand, don't give up, right? If you go get help and you go talk to a therapist and it doesn't feel like everything's resolved, that's okay. Keep going, like keep going back and keep pushing, right? That's the other part of your story that's important within the therapy realm, is you could have easily, and I'm sure this happens, you could have easily said, you know what, like, I'm not supposed to, God doesn't want me doing this. It ain't happening. And I think that happens to people, and I think people lose their lives over it because of this system that you speak of. And I love that you said it that way, because you can't get mad at the people in the system.
Right.
Most of them are there because they want to be of service. They want to help people. But if they have this cloud over them that's directly guiding them and keeping them from honestly helping people, it's probably just as frustrating for them. Like, could you imagine having the tools and the resources and the skills to help somebody, yet your system says you can't right now? What that must feel like to have that ability and not be able to use it because it would be outside of this system. That's why I love what you did. You said, okay, I'm going to create something outside of all of these systems, and I'm going to put things in it that helped me, that impacted me, that benefited me and the people around you. And I'm going to create that for others, and let's see what happens. I think when you do those things, God sends very clear messages on what those impacts are. In the same breath as you, I struggled for a long time accepting those moments of feedback as this positive thing, like that I would actually allow to take in and absorb and feel better. And it wasn't until recently when I met someone, she's really good about reminding me. I'll say something and she's like, really? Like, go read those DMs from, these kids or these letters that you got from these kids or this email that you got from that parent. She's like, we're not doing that. Like, you're going to observe this and you're going to absorb it. And so I love that you had that experience, and I love that you were able to absorb it, not just observe it, but absorb it. I want to transition from there into the running piece, because I want to tell a quick story. So you shot me a DM. That's how we met. And he literally made it impossible to say no. And here's why I say it that way. He's like, where are you at? Where do I need to be? What day? What time? And I'm just like, okay, he's not giving me any options here, right? It's a very successful approach. And I was like, okay, I'm clearly meant to meet this person. Like, this is divine, because I'm that way. Like, if I really want to do something, I'm very direct. Here's the times. Here's where I can be. Here's what I'll do. I'm willing. And you approached it that way. And we met at Green River Grill in Green. But I want to tell the audience what I pulled up to. So I pull in the parking lot, and he had miles to log that day, and he'd logged some, and then but he wanted to make sure that he got to dinner on time. So he left early to get to dinner on time, had some extra time. The first time I ever see him, he's running back through the parking lot. And I was like, oh yeah, that's him for sure. That's the guy. And we sat down, we had this awesome conversation. But I knew then, in that moment, I was like, okay, this is someone who I want, not just around my life, but in my life. Because we're not wired all that different, man. If there's work to be done, especially in this growth pattern that we're currently in, we're going to do it. Rain or shine, doesn't matter, pain or not, because we understand if we don't show up for it, we understand the consequences to that. So I wanted to ask you, within this running thing, you talked about you're running 3 miles a week maybe, and you sign up for this ultra. what got you from that to Bigfoot, right? And Bigfoot, for the audience, like what I want to share is like, it's a 200+ mile race, right? I don't know the exact number.
Yeah, 200.
It's called 200, but I'm pretty sure
209. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, you're good. 209.
Yeah.
But that's why I said that. I want to give it the right respect, because people are like, oh, 9 extra miles. 9 extra miles on 200 is a lot, right? It's a whole lot. And so how do you go from 3 miles a week to having the ability to accomplish a 200-mile 4-day?
The only way I knew, or the only reason I figured out how long it actually took, was my cousin texted me immediately after. He said 4 days, 6 hours, and 32 minutes.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have done the research to figure that out, but yeah.
Yeah.
And now I've got a mental snapshot of that ingrained in me forever.
Mm-hmm.
So how did I get from 3 miles a week to being capable enough to stand the line at Bigfoot? It goes back to gratitude, because when I had no desire to live anymore, I was in a state of learned helplessness, because I internally isolated from everybody, and I rationalized why it would be okay for me to put a bullet in my head. I rationalized why it would be okay for my 2-year-old daughter to not grow up with me as her dad. I rationalized why it would be okay for my wife at the time to grow old without me in her life anymore. I was isolating from everyone internally. Externally, I was this dude that was smiling. Everybody thought I was good. I wasn't good. I was lying. But I knew that when I had that invitation to run an ultra, internally, that was an avenue towards hope. And I'd like to share my favorite verse in the Bible before I get into my journey, because I think that sets a good foundation for why I did and why I'm continuing to do what I do. In Romans chapter 5, verse 3, it says, "Rejoice in all suffering, because suffering produces endurance." In other translations, it says it produces perseverance. Perseverance and endurance produces character, and character produces hope. And hope does not put us to shame. I didn't know that at the time that I got that invitation. I knew what ultras were. Mm-hmm. I said, no, not for me. When I got the invitation, I instantly, without hesitation, said yes. Internally, that was an avenue towards hope, but I needed to volunteer for suffering first. Later, when I read that verse in the Bible, it made sense to me that I have the Holy Spirit living in me because I made the conscious decision to trust God with my whole heart, only not on my own understandings. So I just kept on going, and I showed up for myself every single day, and I gave it all that I had every single day. And eventually, I got to the point after I checked the ultra box a few times. I was on a training run. I didn't want to do it. Middle of the day, Texas, super hot, super dehydrated, zero motivation. And I say that for a reason. Zero motivation. I get out there. Eventually, I'm out there for a while, and I take a moment to reflect on what I volunteered for that no one said I had to. And the lesson that I learned in that moment was that motivation is no prerequisite to accomplishing anything in life, but a willingness to do what you know you can do is an avenue towards being the person that you know you can be. And in that moment that I realized that motivation is no prerequisite, I asked myself a question. I asked, what's your phase one? This is a conversation I had with myself. And that was another door opening to what I get to be a part of today. And every day I ask myself, what's your phase one? And I get to answer that question every day. I was on this ultra journey because I thought that I needed a win. So I started running 50Ks, 100Ks. Eventually, I just made a conscious decision. I'm going to sign up for Rocky. Which, side note, you and I ran Rocky together, and I remember our time on the trail. I didn't know that when I reached out to you, and I started scrolling on your Instagram, and I was like, hold on a second. I wanted to freak out when I finally put the pieces together, but I said, accept it, brother. This is a God thing. Just let it happen. So I said, all right. So rewind just a little bit. Before I ran Rocky, I saw on Ultra Sign Up there was a 48-hour treadmill challenge. I said, nah, it ain't for me. I'm not doing that. 7 minutes later, I was signed up because you had all month to do it. It's 48 hours. I was like, that sounds brutal. But if I can run 48 hours, log 100 miles on my assault runner treadmill in my garage with no audience, what else can I do? So that's what I leaned into. Moment of courage, I said yes. 2:30 in the morning in December, just shy of 48 hours, I logged 101 miles on that assault runner treadmill, no audience, fueled by nothing but compassion for humanity. And I thought, if I'm fueled by love for humanity, what else is God allowing me to do? And in that moment, I realized that my mission in life is to love everyone fiercely because I have no reason not to, period. But it required a conscious decision to volunteer for suffering that I thought was going to validate me as a person, and God intervened and changed my heart. And fast forward, checked the 100 mile for Rocky, and then was met with instant depression because I checked the box. I thought it was going to validate me. I didn't feel like a better person. I started to feel weak again. And that could be great. It could be awesome to be absolutely humbled. But I felt like I was off course and I didn't know what I was doing anymore. So again, just kept on going because my entire ultra journey, it's just felt like the right thing to do. And I've heard of Bigfoot, absolutely terrified by it. Well, signed up for it. Didn't think I was going to get it. Got the notification with 2 months preparation that I was going to stay in the line for Bigfoot. My daughter came to visit me for about 40 days over the summer. I wanted to be present as a father, and I needed miles to log, so I got back on that assault runner treadmill, and I got to work. So I was kitted up for a 200-plus mile run on my assault runner treadmill for 3-4 hours at a time so that I could finish before my daughter woke up. And I loved the moments where I'd be finishing a 4-hour run on that treadmill and I could hear the garage door opening up. And my daughter comes out in the garage. And she just was able to witness me doing what I knew I needed to do so that I could be forged to be the person I know I can be. And she gets it. She's 4. She gets it. She loves seeing me in my element. When I stood that line, absolutely terrified. And I didn't have the confidence to complete a 200-mile race because I've never ran 200 miles before. But I thought back to that moment that I asked myself, what's your phase one? And the moment that I realized that motivation is no prerequisite to accomplishing anything. And I stood that line and I saw an opening at the start. And I was looking around. I was looking at all these capable people. And I also saw this gap at the start. And I was like, that's mine. I'm going to stay in this line. I'm going to do it scared. I'm allowed to do it scared. But I'm allowed to start, and I'm allowed to show up for myself and see what I have in me. Knowing that I've been fueled by compassion in the past, and I can do it again. And in that moment, before we started that run, a little side context for this year's Bigfoot is a little interesting. There were fires, created reroutes. So instead of the traditional 208-mile Bigfoot run, we did 2 50-mile out and backs from the finish. So we started from the finish, went 50 miles out, came back, hit 100, and did the same thing again. That's a whole other story in itself when we're talking about resilience. But when I was standing that line about ready to start, I told myself that fear is a prerequisite and courage is a requirement. And that's just been my theme. It's foundational for me when I make conscious decisions to do the things that I'm willing to do, because I know my mission in life. I know who I am as a person. And I know that my time on earth is so limited. And I recognize that my life is not about glorifying my kingdom. It's glorifying God's kingdom. And I just invite God in to use me. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah.
Cool.
No, it definitely does. I always want to ask people that specific question, because it's the time it takes to go from 3 miles a week to, what's your peak week?
75.
Right. But that peak week technically was over 200.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Technically. So the point I'm trying to get across to people is you did that in about a 2-year span.
Mm-hmm.
And you were probably in okay shape when you started. But the point of all that is, even if you weren't, 15 months for me from 312 to 207 and doing an Ironman, all you have to do is show up. The next step, the next step, the next step. And it's over and over and over again. You almost have to fall in love with the repetitiveness. You have to obsess over it almost on some level. But if you do that, I promise you, you're capable of anything. And I think that's the reason I asked that question, because the first time you run, I remember the first time I ran 2 miles at once and being like, oh my God, that's insane. And then a 5K, and then 5 miles, and then 6 miles. I remember all of it vividly. The first time I ran 8 miles was on Lady Bird. I'd been sober 45, 46 days. I was still close to 3 bills. And this guy I'd met, he's like, hey, we're going to go set a PR for running. PR for me at that time would have been like 4.5, 5 miles. So I'm like, oh, I got that. And we went out on Lady Bird, and I knew we were doing out and back. And we got out 2.5 miles, and I'm like waiting for him to like, hey, we're going to turn back, you know. And we got out 3 miles, and I'm like, we got to go back. Like, I'm aware. I'm not an idiot. And I start bitching. That's just the truth. I start complaining. I'm like, man, come on. Like, what are you trying to do to me? And he's like, come on. And so we made it to 4, and he's like, all right, we'll turn around. Well, in my head, I knew in that moment, like, oh, this is 8 miles. And I spent the next 1.5 miles, 2 miles just eating him up, like verbally, you know, just being a jerk. I was upset. I was in my feelings. I was sad, all these things. And I worked myself almost into a rage. And I just took off running. I was like, you know what? I'm just going to show him. I took off running. I ran the whole way back. And when he ran up, I'm like ready to talk smack. You know, I'm like, oh yeah, you think? And he looked at me and he's like, it worked. Good job. And he just walked away. And I was like, what? And I had to think about that for a long time. And really all it was him saying, you're more capable than you're giving yourself credit for. And once I grasped that, every time I get in one of those moments or opportunities now really is what they are, where I'm struggling and I want to stop, I understand there's always more. That's been a hard thing for me to digest, and that's going to be big for me coming up in 9 days. There's going to come that point where I'm like, screw this. I'm done. Man, this is horrible. Why am I out here? I've wasted another 10 months training, like whatever. But this year, I can't wait to apply that thought and be like, you're so capable. Just go. You're so capable. Just go. It doesn't matter if you're running 1 mile or 100 miles. If your effort is in a place where you're giving everything you have, you need to understand it is going to suck. It just does. If you go out and do an all-out mile right now and really put all out, everything into it, it's going to start hurting at 3/10s, 4/10s, 5/10s, 6. I mean, it's just how it is. You go out and run 100 miles. Okay, the effort, like in from an acute place, is very different, but long-term effort is very similar. You're gonna get to that point where it's like, I can't keep going, and you just have to keep going. And so I think that's what Ultra's given me, if anything, other than like teaching me about life itself. But what's been crazy, and you brought this up too, is the amount of people I've connected with after Rocky that were like, dude, I was there. And it's like, it just blows my mind. Right. And it kind of highlights the selfish headspace that I was in at that time too. I didn't really remember a whole lot of people. You know what I mean? Like I was all about like, am I good? Am I fueling appropriately? And like, I was so focused on self that I think I limited myself, because that's not who I am. I'm much better when it's like wide lens, everyone involved. How do I help? How do I show up? I'm such a better human, and I'm so much more capable in that. So I look forward to being able to apply that too. And literally, I believe if I make this effort about everything other than myself, then it will be successful regardless of the finish. And it's taken me forever to get to that point. We've talked about this before, and you kind of led into it, but I wanted to make sure we took a second to talk about it. Medals, buckles, all the goods, right? What do they mean to you?
Nothing. I don't care at all.
Yeah. What do you do with them?
I keep them there's a small Pelican case. It's like tucked in the back corner of my closet.
Yep.
I used to have them hanging up, and I was like, why? What am I looking at? What is that doing for me today? And I love that you really highlighted what I think is the most important component to showing up for yourself, which is showing up for yourself on a daily basis. That's the internal buckle that I care about. And I think of it like a confidence token. Like I've crossed some lines. That's really sweet. I'm going to take this confidence token, put it in my pocket. So when I go out and live my life, which is met with daily adversity, okay, now I know that I volunteered for discomfort in the past. I have a way forward. And I think that it's so important to talk about and to just, I guess, double tap on what you were mentioning earlier, which is like the daily consistency. And for me, integrity and patience are my pillars. It's foundational. Integrity is doing what I know I need to do and doing what I know I can do, because it's going to help me be the person I know I can be. But I have to be patient in that process. The process is progress, and that is enough for me. Like every single day is a blessing. When I first started talking in this conversation, I'm talking about gratitude. Like every single day that I wake up is a blessing in itself. Because I go back into my garage where I get to work with myself, and I look at this wall that's painted black with 3 words painted red: integrity, patience. Underneath that is a solid line. Underneath that line is endure, period. Life's going to be hard. But if I lean into integrity and patience and understand that every single day is met with adversity, I have an opportunity to endure. And I know that I'm capable because I volunteered for so much discomfort before. Volunteering for discomfort for a purpose is an avenue towards progress. So I'm going to take a little step back. Sorry, going on a little side tangent, but you mentioned some things that I really wanted to highlight. So thank you, brother.
Mm-hmm. No, it's all good, man. I have a vulnerable question for you.
Please.
If you're down.
Oh, yeah.
How's your sleep?
Sleep, not the best. I always think.
I'm struggling too, and that's why I asked.
Yeah.
Because people are like, what? You struggle? Yes. My brain, man, to shut it off. And you hear these shorts and reels on podcasts like, you're just not working hard enough. I'm like, brother, I'm burning every candle I got on every end. And sometimes the brain, it just doesn't want to turn off.
Yeah.
And so I was wondering, vulnerably for me too, what's your approach in those moments when your brain's just wrapped up? I mean, going wild and you can't sleep. And then I start doing the reverse count. Like, okay, if I fall asleep right now, I got 4 hours. And then now I'm at 3. And now it's an hour and a half. I actually overslept in Ultra in Colorado for that reason. I flew out there, got an RV, trained for this race for 5 months. And I overslept because I was doing this thing I'm telling you about.
Yeah.
What helps you turn it off?
It's a great question that I still have not been able to answer. The reality is I just don't sleep well. And I think it's because I'm always thinking about like that question that I ask in the morning, what's your phase 1? And when you and I were talking on the podcast, just to clarify, talking on the phase 1 podcast, I was explaining to you that it's like a day 1 mentality, like daily resets. There's boxes to check. And if I feel like I'm not checking boxes, then I can't sleep well. But the boxes that I have right now, it's like, how do I serve people? Did I serve well? I don't know I don't think I do turn it off. I'll just sit there. I'll lay down and just look at the ceiling. Like there's nothing that I can do. Well, there's nothing that I do that I've been successful at to consistently help me sleep better. Sometimes I'll take like an Epsom salt bath or something. Like I'll try.
Right.
But I don't know. I don't know, brother.
Yeah, I think I need to have like a sleep specialist on.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
I struggle with it too. I think for me, there's a lot tied into that. I've spent a large part of my life basing my peace of mind off of how I feel others feel about me. So if I need peace, I need validation that they're happy with me. We're in a good place. That's rooted in my childhood, for sure. And I've had to learn slowly to untwist and untangle that. And I still struggle with it. You know, I don't seek that same amount of validation or reassurance as regularly now, but to say I never do it would be a lie. You know, there's times where it's more like an olive branch, right? It's like, I'm not going to ask for it directly, but I'm going to give you an opportunity to do so. And then, which is ridiculous because people aren't thinking that way. And then they don't respond in that way that you think you need. And then therefore, now you're let down even more, right? You're like, well, I'm just not worthy of whatever. So I think that eats me up a lot. You know, that keeps me from sleeping. And I think the other thing that keeps me from sleeping is almost an obsession with what's next. Something that scares me. That there's a 100-miler in 9 days. God willing, I'm going to finish that race. My first one. It's 3 years in the making. It's going to happen. I'm terrified of what's going to happen after that race. So much so I have another 100-miler on the books for February because I'm thinking, well, at least give me something. But I have the awareness to at least to understand that, hey, there's going to be the bottom's going to fall out after this, because what's next, right? What's greater, what's bigger. And I've spent so much time on that. And I honestly think that that's part of the reason God hasn't allowed me to finish yet, because I think he's wanting me to find what I'm going to pour into next, because he knows if I don't have that vessel to pour into, I just get spilled out all over the floor. And I think I've put enough effort into that at this point to understand where I'm going to put that effort and that energy, where it won't be like this catastrophic thing. Because that happened after my Ironman. I'd buried my head for 15 months, finished it, and then had no clue what to do.
Oh yeah.
And fortunately, God threw me an olive branch. He's like, well, here's your first contract to go to work. Thank God. So I poured into that with everything. And then the next thing you know, I look up and I'm like, oh, I'm out of shape again. I got to get back into shape. And it's this battle for me of understanding where to put my efforts, my focus, my energy, make sure that I'm having balance on some level. My balance probably doesn't look average. I don't think yours does either. And that's okay. I think balance depends on the human, on the person. I think it also depends on God's purpose for you. You know, I think that those things all play a role, but I struggle in that. And you talk about day one mentality. If I'm ever really struggling, or I'm feel like I'm falling behind, that's my reset button. It's like, okay, we're going back to day one. Full systems reset. What does that look like? And what's difficult about that, I think, is as you progress, you have to create new levels to day one. It's not the same as it was July 19th, 2020. Day one then was like, don't drink, don't do drugs, move your body, try to eat something that's not horrible. Like that was day one. Well, if I do that today, I'm behind, right? I feel like I'm not successful. And so I struggle with that same thought too when I'm trying to sleep of, well, what is the next level? What do I need to do? What do I not need to do? And so I've always wondered from someone else, and I'm glad that you opened up about having this overactive thought process or brain. When you're having a conversation with someone you care about, this new lady, for example, do you struggle with like trusting what she's saying without question? Like, do you overthink any of those conversations, or are you able to just take them as they are?
This is a good question. I've been able to take everything that she says for what she's saying. And we had a conversation early when we started talking, and we both said we trust each other fully because we have no reason not to. And because of that, it broke this barrier. We both agreed that we're not working hard at trying to earn trust. It's already given. And that allows us to be so raw and vulnerable with each other, which enhances this relationship and this connection that her and I have. And another thing that I told her, and people can think I'm crazy, it's okay, I give them permission, it's all good. But I talk about it all the time. I love everyone, fully and fiercely, because I have no reason not to. And so every day I tell her in other words, like how much she means to me, and how grateful I am that she's in my life. And I recognize so much the value that she adds to my life, but I can't be selfish with that. And so I ask her sometimes, because sorry if I'm going on a side tangent, but I heard you mention validation, and I brought this up to her last week. I was like, I may need some validation that I'm adding value to your life, because if I'm not adding value to your life, I don't know what I'm doing for you.
Right.
And so for me, I just kind of recognized that, which is different. But I'm a different person this growth journey that I've been on for the last 2 years, I'm just a different person. And before I go off on crazy tangents.
You're good.
Cool.
I do.
Yeah.
There is something I do want to make sure we get to, because I think it's another God thing that it just hit me.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember what day in April? By chance? That might be like a crazy question.
I don't. Well, I think I may be getting the months a little mixed up, actually, because we met. How did this work? I met you after I completed my first Last Man Standing. It was supposed to be in April. It got canceled. It actually got pushed to June.
Okay.
Actually, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know, man.
I'm leaning on April, and we'll do the research afterwards. We'll put it in the show notes. But the reason I asked that question is because I remember our first conversation, and I loved you then. I love you now.
Love you too.
But you're not the same person, even from then till now. And I mean that in the most like complimentive way. I remember that conversation and walking away from it thinking like, that dude's going to do something big. I don't know what it is. No clue. But I remember that feeling. And I'm sure you've gotten it with people too. You're like, it doesn't have to be dude, but like that human is going to do something big. That I walked away with that feeling. But watching you come into this like light and lane that you're coming into is nothing short of awesome. Like it's the best. And we actually got to meet for coffee a couple weeks ago, 3 weeks ago maybe. Mm-hmm. And you got to meet someone who's important to me. We got to have this wonderful conversation. And afterwards, and she said it again today, but she's like, I just love that guy. I don't know what it is. I just love him. That speaks to your compassion. That can't be faked. It's on the surface and it's in your core, right? Through and through. That's, I think, that's who you are, is this person who just wants people to be okay. Mm-hmm. But I don't think you could be that if God wouldn't have forged you the way that he did. Mm-hmm. And that's also like, it's not a coincidence that you went through these modes of survival in your childhood. And now you get to show up every day and that's your job, right? That's God too. Mm-hmm. And so I think about all of that and how we met and how it's all wrapped up, but it's like, God doesn't make mistakes. Mm-mm. God's like, you two are going to meet. Like, okay, you don't want to meet at the race. Great. Like, I'm going to make it work this way. I'm going to make it work that way. It's going to be a podcast thing. It's going to be an Instagram thing. I can't help but at this point in my life believe that all of that's God. Every last bit of it. Mm-hmm. And so I'm just thankful for you, man. I'm thankful for you. I'm thankful for every conversation that we have. I feel like every time we talk, I walk away with something that is a solution for my own life, my own being. Like you give me that. That's a gift. That's a gift that you have. It's almost like you know what somebody maybe needs to hear, and then you present it in a way that they can understand it and they can hear it and they can accept it. And so I thank you for that. It's quite literally changed my life. And you did it again today, talking about, and you've told me about it before, but it took to today to really sink in this integrity and patience thing. Mm. That's what I needed to hear today. That's where I'm struggling. I'm being impatient, and I'm not staying integrous, if you will, in my impatience. And it's like, there's your answer, bud. Sit in it. Be patient. Maintain your integrity. Line. Endure. So thank you. I appreciate you, man. And I think we're going to have to find a way. I know you said you leave in a couple weeks. We're going to have to find a way to do this again, just because I think we need more time. We're getting like literally cut right now, but I want to make sure that we continue this conversation, because there's still so much to unwrap. And I just want to say thank you, man.
Thank you, bro. If I could say thank you too. Yeah. I knew that I was going to be emotional today, because how do I even say it? For a really long time, I've been working really hard at trying to be happy and experience peace. And I'm in a season of my life right now where I experience absolute peace, absolute gratitude. I'm so grateful for every single day that I wake up, that God gives me, because I know what it feels like to not want to live anymore. And I know what it feels like to not want to choose life, but I choose life every single day. I ask myself, what's your phase one? And I lean into integrity, and I lean into patience, and I hold the line, and I endure that process. It's a beautiful process. And in the beginning of this conversation, I was saying that I have one beautiful memory as a child. I remember growing up and going up to my grandparents' house, looking up in the mountains, and I've always been a deep thinker. And I asked myself, like, John, what are you going to do with your life? I didn't know. It's those same mountains that I teach students how to survive in. I'm grateful for all my suffering. I wouldn't change a fucking thing, bro. Not one thing. I'm grateful for all my suffering, the opportunities that I have to forgive my father. Like, I have daily opportunities to forgive. I love him fiercely and fully. I love my brothers fiercely and fully. I love you fierce and full, and everybody on the planet. 8.1 billion people, man. There's a lot of work to do, and I'm inviting God in to do the work. But I believe that when we are willing and we're courageous and we invite God in to do the work, things are going to get cool real fast.
Yeah.
And when I ask myself, what's my phase one, I get to lay my head down at night and recognize that I ain't fucking dead yet.
Yeah.
And I love it so much.
Yeah.
So I have to say thank you for the invitation and let me come on your platform and have a meaningful conversation. This means more to me than I can express.
No, I just appreciate you being here, man, and I appreciate you opening up in the way that you did. But I love you, man.
Love you too.
I'm so grateful, and that's going to wrap it for today's episode of the Ain't Dead Yet podcast. Thank you guys so much.